Thank you for the kind introduction, and I appreciate everybody, regardless of where you are in the global enterprise today. We're located at the Chapman Group in the East Coast in the U.S., so it is sort of a pinch afternoon, and we're starting close to on time. A logistical point is that we will be going about 35 minutes or so, and then leave some time at the end for answering questions we get. And again, as was mentioned, the presentation will be posted at chapmanhq.com. So we'll make all this valuable content available to our participants. So again, thank you. It's a very important time of year for a lot of reasons. Obviously, a very nice time of year coming into the East Coast of the U.S. with the leaves and autumn and all the colors. However, from a business standpoint, we're now getting right into the middle of that period called planning, and especially as it relates to strategic account management programs, we're now starting to look at, how do we plan properly so that we have just an outstanding 2014. So today, that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about a lot of the best practices that should be incorporated into our strategic account management operating plan to make 2014 just an extraordinary year. As you see on your screen now, it's really all about having a well thought out and constructed approach. And that's what we're after today, is to explore some very vital practices and areas within the operating plan to really take out some of the variables in making 2014 just an extraordinary year. So one of the first things I'd like to do today is maybe, in addition to thanking everybody for participating, because it's great to see that people are taking the time and making the investment in being the best they can be. So I'm going to start by probably overusing the word right. However, it's an important word. I heard a client not too many years ago have a theme in their own businesses: let's get it right the first time. And I think when we start talking about an operating plan for strategic account management, we really do want to get it right. And obviously it will need maybe some tweaks and modifications during the year, but let's get it right. So what are some of those right things that we want to focus on today? We certainly want to make sure we've got the right accounts identified. We want to make sure that we deploy the right people on this mission. We want to execute the right activities. We want to make sure that we optimize the team performance and have the right development programs, tools, and technologies. And we want to make sure we've got the right dashboard metrics, that we really got a scoreboard that helps us measure and coach our program and our team. Very importantly, we've got to establish the right funding. And we're going to talk very specifically about, what do we need to consider when we talk about right funding. And finally, the seventh point today will be around this whole, we need to communicate the plan, the right messaging. And by the way, as you'll hear me say again later, that messaging is both internal and external. So who owns the operating plan? Well, really the leader of the strategic account management program technically owns the operating plan. However, we would argue that it's really a team sport. And what I mean by that is there's some very, very important pockets of knowledge and influence that should be incorporated as you develop your operating plan. For example, the strategic account managers themselves. Great idea to go out, get some inputs, ideas, brain thinking time around what happened in maybe 2013 to make sure we're addressing that in 2014. Other leaders in the organization, whether it be senior leaders, everybody says you need to manage up and manage down, but certainly senior leaders that are going to be directly involved in the management of these top accounts is also a critical point. The keepers of the finances and the budgets. Many organizations today on a global basis are very oriented around, being fiscally sound. So CFOs, finance directors, those people are very important as we go through the operating plan process. The HR and marketing leaders, the marketing leaders that may have very valuable insights on the market needs and demands, as well as voice of the customer. One thing we've got to keep in mind, how important it is to be account-centric, and that if we do have voice of the customer feedback directly linked to a specific account, we want to integrate that into the operational plan development. If you don't by chance have, as we'll say again later, voice of customer feedback, it might be a very important thought process to consider as we get ready for a great 2014. Certainly HR, because of the need that we're going to have to understand their programs and processes and capabilities to help us ensure we've got the right team, and then the key resources in addition to what we might normally think about is, are we going to need IT, sales operations? What are these other resources that we might need that's going to help us really focus on a great 2014? And finally, what are some of the possible ad hoc leaders of other functions like R&D, engineering, client services? I mentioned marketing before. Who are some of these other ad hoc, sort of on an as-demand basis, that we might want to solicit input from as we create this operating plan for our Strategic Account Manager program? A couple tips. One thing we know is we don't recommend that we do this operating plan sort of in a silo. Just as I mentioned, we want to make sure we collaborate with all the right bodies of knowledge that can help us put together an effective and well thought out plan. The tip number 2 is how important it is to have and establish a common language and nomenclature. It's very crucial that what we're calling an account planner, or what we're calling voice of the customer, or what we're calling our KPIs, or what is that the rest of our organization, top to bottom, understands this common language. So we've got to, almost to the point of maybe even indicating a glossary or publishing a glossary or whatever, we've got to have a common language that everybody understands within the organization. The third tip is, as I started to mention earlier, we really need to utilize any internal feedback we have from our team as well as external feedback. And by the way, external feedback is certainly voice of the customer, but however, it could also be industry experts and thought leaders, which takes us to tip number 4. There are a lot of resources out there. I'm very proud to say that we're a very active member in the Strategic Account Management Association, SAMA, and I still reside on the board of directors of that organization. And that's an organization, a global organization, purely focused on knowledge share around the global practices of strategic account management. So there are many other member organizations, thought leaders, conferences to attend as a resource that are out there to help us, guide us in this development of a best-in-class strategic account management program. So today what we're going to do is overview about 7 roughly of these practices that we want to consider as we create this masterpiece of our strategic account management operating plan for 2014. From a process standpoint, this is how we're going to cover each area. We're going to talk about, for example, the core practice, in this case, account segmentation. Just to highlight what was mentioned before, almost everything I'm covering here is available in the ebook version of this, which will be posted and is posted on chapmanhq.com. So I am going to add some additional data points that you'll see in the circles here, not necessarily round circles, but these other points of importance relevant to each topic area. And I'm going to try to bring it to life a little bit and bring in industry examples of how many organizations, much like yourself, have tackled the same area and brought it to life into one operating plan. So we all know selecting the right accounts is critical. What is so critical about that process of doing that? What we know is one very critical factor is that whatever categories we use or subcategories or criteria we use should be balanced, that 50% maybe should be a rear view of the experience with that customer, and there should be at least 50% of the criteria which is more of a futuristic view. Examples, we certainly have financial data, what they've purchased, what they've spent, product mix solutions, which gives us some great history there. But we also want to include a futuristic view, and that's around the potential opportunities, maybe for our new innovative solutions we're bringing out, their willingness to partner in the future, the metric of the voice of the customer we have that talks about, do we really have an encounter, a relationship, or a partnership. So when we do our account segmentation, balance, the 50-50 balance I mentioned in considerations is critical. As I go through that process and I account for this, because in the operating plan I more than likely will be listing who my top tier accounts are, more than likely a second tier, maybe even have a category other. You certainly can, there's various nomenclature to use out there: strategic, large, key, major. Whatever nomenclature you use, just be consistent. But from a standpoint of involvement, we want to make sure that we involve all the appropriate members of our organization in this process, and maybe in some cases even a customer, to help validate data points that we are assessing around this relationship. The intangibles, we always have that information that maybe isn't so easily captured on a spreadsheet, for example, an intangible such as maybe one of our accounts is just merged or been acquired by somebody, or there's some noteworthy news that we need to be aware of, or somebody has identified a particular strategic initiative that aligns them more with us today than it ever did before. So we do want to account for these intangibles, and we suggest making sure we note if it's an intangible and capture what that is, because that should weigh in to the whole criteria of selecting the right accounts. So a real example of a process of how this worked, in the healthcare industry, we worked with a company that we first presented a template of what a segmentation model looked like, and then we modified, through workshops, modified that template so that they could, so it was really very focused on their world, their industry. We then modeled a couple accounts through that. They did as well, modeled those accounts, tested the methodology here for the segmentation to see where some of their top customers or other customers fell out, and then we made the appropriate adjustments, and then we launched this on more of a wholesale basis. And what does it mean to launch that? So the launch really was, once we had validated the segmentation instrument, we actually had web meetings in this case where the client was engaged with their team members and going on sort of a one-by-one account basis and filling in the information that they may not had readily available. They then did a final validation of this, and they were set in that particular time period to say, we've now got an approach and we've segmented our accounts and we're ready for 2014. The second area, and these are not necessarily in any order of preference or priority, however, I would put talent pretty high up there. Certainly you've got to have the right accounts. Now we've got to have the right people to execute on the mission. So as I'm developing my operating plan, I certainly have to consider what my team, the makeup of my team is today, maybe even the cost of that team and the compensation associated with that team. However, it all starts with a position description. So do I really have clarity in what my strategic account management position is, and how is that different from our sales position? For example, the most often area that's missed in a position description for a strategic account manager is that the real clarity and definition around high value activities and how they're different than just sales activities, and what the exact KPIs, key performance indicators, are, and how that might be different than the sales KPIs. And that's important because as I measure and start assessing my team, I'm then benchmarking them against the position description, as well as the second note that you see here, best in role benchmarking. I'm now going to take some of my top performers, those that I've identified that are my best strategic account managers for a variety of reasons, and some of those reasons is that they match up to the traits and competencies that we seek, and maybe even the results, and I want to start benchmarking my team, and ultimately probably talking about or speaking to in my operating plan the evolution I may need to go through. And evolution be that we may not have what we seek immediately in all the talent, and I may not be able to do a wholesale change, but what does my evolutionary process look like over the next 12, 18, or 24 months so that I start building the A-level strategic account management team? I understand because of resource availability, I may have some A's, I may have some B's, hopefully not too many C's. What I need to consider is, can I move a C to a B? Is B going to be able to do the job? What B's are going to be A's? And I need to understand that. That also will play a role later as we talk in the operating plan around development, training and development. The next core practice we want to focus on is high-value activities. And there is a distinct difference, as I mentioned, in my operating plan. I want to mention what are some of these high-value activities that we may want to consider as by definition in the role of the strategic account manager. And one of the reasons I want to consider that is in my operating plan, I'm going to really probably be measuring these activities or the cadence of these activities, and there could be some financial implications associated with it. For example, if I have VIP visits to corporate headquarters as one of my high-value activities with my strategic accounts, I should account for the economic impact that some of those costs might have. If I'm going to set up user groups or user councils or field-level regional workshop, I need to account for that because I'm identifying these as high-value activities in my strategic account management program, and what is the economic impact so that I'm not scrambling later to fund these. I've sort of got a prescription for them well ahead of time. High-value activities are also what we would call high-impact activities. And these high-impact activities are different in a strategic account management program versus sales because they're probably more relationship management based as well as revenue based, which is opportunity management, but probably more oriented to the relationship development. That really enables us to take a little different approach here, where traditional sales might be viewed as a push of revenue to get it in. A real effective strategic account management program is more of a pull-through because the extraordinary job we do as a supplier in partnership with our customer. So high impact, what are those? And I mentioned a few like VIP visits, peer-to-peer activities where we work to engage the senior leaders of our customer with the senior leaders of ours. Excuse me, what are those high-value activities, high-impact activities we want to engage around? And we certainly should look at strategic plays. And these are probably strategies that we may be undertaking over the course of a 12 or 18-month window. For example, putting together a user conference or a roundtable conference or a peer-to-peer roadshow, whatever it might be, so that we can, in fact, plan for those in our operating plan. A real case study example is we were doing a fair amount of work in the chemical industry, and one of our clients did a lot of modeling on around what were the critical activities that really were elevating relationships and activities amongst their A-level, B-level players, or strategic account managers. Once we had identified that, they started to look and see were they accounted for or linked to the KPIs, and were they in fact embedded in any kind of dashboard or radar screen so that they were being measured and there was an agreed to cadence around them. So once all that effort was done, it helped really get the reality of what were the right high-value activities for that particular customer. So you may have some of the knowledge of those within your ranks already within your organization. You may need to, as we said, flush them out a little bit from your team members. We then want to make sure in our operating plan that we think through hard and long about how we're going to optimize the SAM team performance. And that's all the way of operating as a SAM operating team around one account, and it includes also the right development programs for the team and individuals within the team, as well as the tools and technologies to support them. I would throw in that, as you would see in the light blue area, even some areas to think about coaching as it relates to do that. One of the recommendations is to look at your operating plan and say, do I have an operating guideline for my SAM program? Do I really have sort of a playbook or some policies and procedures documented that account for what I'm delivering in my operating plan that substantiates that the two line up well? so my operating guidelines reinforce and support what I'm doing. An example of that could be in an operating guideline what we call RACI. Do I have any documentation around my organization of who's responsible, accountable, consulted with, or informed around critical activities, relationships, or events that happen in the process of strategic account management? That really impacts what kind of development I might need to do as it relates to the whole team-based engagement around individual accounts. I also want to make sure when I get into my whole team performance that I've really understood and locked down on in my business, in the business profession of strategic account management. I have a very good feel for traits and competencies. An example of that is we're working with a company in the technical world who's actually doing a lot of evaluation. In this particular case, we're bringing in what the traits and characteristics are of an effective SAM. They're seeing who they have with those and who they may not have. And we're also you need to identify maybe which of those, especially some of the competencies, what could be trained to, okay? There could be conducting an effective senior level meeting could be a competency that we want to plan that we need some training and development around. So in addition to identifying that, this particular organization did a sort of a 360 analysis to get everybody's feedback, even those who work with the strategic account managers, to have a real good view of what potential efforts they need to do to optimize the team as it relates to skills, traits, competencies of what they could affect. I mean, there's some things you can't affect, and that's understood. And unfortunately, that you sometimes may end up with you've got a round peg that may not necessarily go through a square hole. But what we do want to know is that when I do have a very good baseline of the right team, is that I've got a development plan for all of 2014 that spells out what I'm going to do, especially in the area of training and development. One of the most common areas that we've recognized through surveys and other feedback through SAMA is that measurements and metrics are quite often not as prolific or visible in SAM programs as maybe they need to be. And I would suggest that in an operating plan that you identify what are going to be your core operating metrics and measurements, and even the process for coaching them in the upcoming year. I've given you some suggestions around in the upper right of maybe it's the opportunity pipeline. It could be a relationship metric to assess, are we really going high, wide, and deep, which we often refer to as 3 by 3 by 3. We've got many clients today who look at the loyalty metric as a potential dashboard metric. And so when we think of the SAM dashboard, we want to make sure that it's composed of probably two kinds of measurements and metrics. Certainly what we would call lagging indicators, which are traditionally more of the past history, the financial, the product spend, the product mix. They're more of the, the lagging indicators. We want to make sure we got also some of the predictive indicators, the futuristic ones. And they're the ones that, like the relationship index I talked about, the voice of the customer, they're more predictive. Even a risk assessment could be a more predictive indicator. Now, my dashboard probably, you got to be careful that whatever you identify in your operating plan for next year's dashboard are critical measurements, but you want to not have too many. You may want to have 2, 3, 4 at the most lagging, maybe 2, 3 predictive, until your organization, starts to assimilate around the value of using and coaching to measurements and metrics. I've heard many times before in business that if you really want to improve something, you got to measure it. And then it's hard to manage anything you don't measure. So if we think of that logic, what the SAM dashboard will enable me to do is measure very critical things within our organization in relationship. It'll enable me to manage those activities, but probably most important, it'll enable me to coach them. One important consideration as I'm looking at measurements and metrics in my operating plan, where's that data going to come from? Do I have to provision in my operating plan anywhere of where that data is going to come from? Is it available today in my CRM system? Is it available somewhere in in a data warehouse? Is it not available at all? Do I may need to go use maybe some other instrument or tool temporarily until that is available? And then probably one of the most important metrics to consider that we're starting to see on a global basis is this whole topic around voice of the customer, is how important it is to integrate voice of the customer as a metric into account planning and have the account managers consider that in their engagement process with their customer. What could be richer in a partnership than discussing what's most important to your customer as well as what's the most important to you as a supplier and getting that into the collaborative action plan? So we were doing some work not long ago in the freight industry, and the way they tackled this was to look at actually, it had no dashboard, but to look at what they were tracking and capturing today, and they try to sort of bucketize what these important things were into a dashboard. We then solicited help from actual members of the strategic account management team and said, okay, which of these were practical to capture, which of these could be potentially system fed, and with a sensitivity of not increasing work. Strategic account manager already traditionally very busy. And then finally rolled out a prototype, tested it, and now operationalized that there is a dashboard with measurements and metrics to coach to. The good news is that effort, those initiatives, are now well recognized and known, and they can be planned for and funded within the operating plan, which is probably a good segue to this whole topic of funding. So in your strategic account management operating plan, there should be, almost like running a business approach where you've got revenue and expenses and the net of this whole, what 2014 looked like. Senior leaders today would look at a SAM program and say, what's the payback? So if you look on the right side of your screen, you'll see investment analysis, what's the payback? And there is a difference, by the way, between a new SAM program and a mature program. We've done some studies in the past and looked at this, and when you look at sales operating ratio, which is sales expenses or SAM program expenses versus associated revenue, in a new program, we've seen percentages as high as 2.5, 3% of revenue when you include all the fixed and variables of manpower, marketing, travel, everything possible related to the SAM program, conferences, versus a mature program where you've had a chance to generate some revenue, that metric, that number, drops down to 1.2 or 1.4%. It certainly varies by sort of industry and product solution. However, there is definitely a higher investment ratio in a new program versus a mature program. The question for you in your operating plan, how does your ratio look, and what is your plan, which obviously the best way to handle this is drive revenue up to reduce that ratio. The other real important piece that we've learned, and we publish some of these reports through SAMA at the Trends and Analysis Report, survey reports, is we do see a much better payback on a SAM program. For example, we've seen 5, 8, 10% improvement in what a SAM program or a SAM account, how they're managed, delivers than if we manage that same account as just a traditional sales transactional account. So there is a better payback. So when you're doing your operational plan and you're analyzing your financials, don't forget to factor in that while traditional revenue was this from that account, I think you can make a pretty valid business case that the revenue could be higher based on improved processes, practices, skills, team, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, what is most often missed in the operating plan or in many strategic account management programs in general is the importance of communicating the plan, the right messaging and messaging process. I need to make sure that my organization, that I consider how I'm going to do this high, wide, and deep in my organization, and in some cases in my client organizations, so that the brand of my program, the effectiveness of my program is well recognized. Examples is is we've seen some organizations install portals, communication portals, where anybody in the organization can view and see what's happening in the strategic account management program. We've seen newsletters published within the organization or a component of the existing newsletter talking about the strategic account management program. I bring that up because we have to account for that. There could be some potential investment. We've seen roadshows. You know, as a case study example, we had a company in the healthcare technology industry that specifically went out and did regional, almost office by office roadshows to educate their entire team, high, wide, and deep, on what this strategic account management program was going to be and what their role and how valuable everybody else in the organization was as part of the team. They even created posters, themes, and they actually went to market with a name for their strategic account management program. So the other value of communicating it is we're always going to have this need to gain the buy-in and support of high, wide, and deep within our own organization. And we really want to publish these ongoing updates to ensure that we're doing success sharing within the organization. So as I look at a core practice of my operating plan, I've got to make sure I'm accounting for how I'm going to communicate this information up and down my management team. They often say you got to manage up and you got to manage down. And equally important, as I go and engage with my customer, how I'm going to do that as well. Okay, so what have we talked about here today? Well, before we get into that, I know we've got some quite a few international people participating in the U.S. Take a little bit of a baseball phrase. Years ago, there was a great catcher for the New York Yankees called Yogi Berra. He spoke in a sort of his own little language and dialect, and he created these phrases because of the way he said things, which were like called yogiisms. And I thought it was appropriate that we might have a very appropriate yogiism here that it says, if you don't know where you're going, you will end up someplace else. What we're saying here is by having a well thought out, effective strategic account management operating plan, we will know where we're going, and we'll end up where we want to end up. And where we want to all end up is great partnerships with our accounts that are mutually beneficial for now and the future, speaking as well as to the finances associated with that. So we want our customer to have good revenue and profitability, as well as we want to appreciate good revenue and profitability, and we want to sustain those relationships for the long term and basically create a significant gap between us and our competition in how we service this marketplace. So today we talked about the importance of the right account, segmentation, the right people, talent. Got to work on making sure I got the right talent, even using talent assessment instruments to do that. I've got to make sure I know the right activities for my marketplace, my industry, that's going to create revenue and opportunity. I've got to have the team engaged in this, and I've got to make sure everybody's at the right skill level and competencies and that can help execute the plan. I've got to have a dashboard. I got to have that right dashboard with the right metrics and measurements so that I can measure my cadence. I can measure, are we doing the right things? Am I measuring that? And then I can coach to that. And by the way, it enables me to catch an issue earlier than too late. Do I have a financial plan? It's best to account for these things up front than to try to go back and get additional funding in many organizations later. I think what we want to do is have that comprehensive plan and say, this is what it's going to take to create these extraordinary partnerships with those accounts that mean so much to our future. And finally, we talked about how important it is to communicate, the communication process, the right messaging. You have the opportunity, and you're putting together strategic account management programs and a plan that are going to just make a tremendous difference to everybody, your organization and the customer. We want to make sure we have a plan for knowledge share and a plan for just making us even better than we were in 2000 or going to be in 2014. So, without any further to do, I'm going to sort of open it up. We've already received some questions, and on the bottom of your screen you have the ability to submit questions. I'll take this point right now to just mention as a refresh, you all will be receiving notice of how to access this documentation in both YouTube and also chapmanhq.com. It's going to be available out there, and take advantage of it. Share it with your team. It'll be a self-running video and PowerPoint, so you'll be able to share this and think about how I can have what I would call world-class or best-in-class strategic account management operating plan. So we've gotten a couple questions already, so I'm going to have the questions read, and then we'll try to address them. Okay? So the first question we received was around this whole topic of, in the economy, we know that costs are always an issue. As you're developing the operating plan, any suggestions in where to optimize, the cost and optimize the funding you do get? It's a good question. I mean, we do live in a global economy that certainly has had its fair number of challenges. Here's what I would suggest. I think there's 3 or 4 areas that you can, when you do your plan, you could consider to optimize your investment. One is tools. And by the way, I think I mentioned this, the strategic account management is an investment that we want to get a payback. That's why this is so critical. Is tools. Do I need a full-blown CRM, or can I maybe, can an Excel spreadsheet for an account plan get me through right now? Or other tools that I might need, some type of shareware for communication. And are we smart in travel? Are we consolidating our travel? Let's not give up too much travel. It relates to building partnerships on site with our customer, but are we wise in our use of travel? In training and development, are we using all the available venues out there, whether it be an example at the SAM annual conference? There are many organizations that bring their team there and sort of get a double bang for their investment there, because they not only learn at the conference, but they also have team meetings and training at the conference. Are these venues that you can do? And are there some technology tools that we may not be taking full advantage of, like Skype or Skype calling, or on more on-site time and collaboration between coaches and team members? So I would just maybe make it I was working with one client recently. He made it one initiative just to take a hard look at what their expense projection is today and where there's some potential savings without compromising the mission. We have a second question that came in that said, I basically inherited a team. I can't just sort of get rid of everybody and start with a new team. You have any suggestions of what to do? Well, normally a lot of organizations have a lot of the right people. What I would do is focus on understanding who your keepers are, sort of categorized in ABC according to some kind of benchmark and profile, and then making sure that I've got the right KPIs in place to measure my team. And then I would have, as I mentioned earlier, sort of a reinvention program or process that I would build into my plan, so that I'm looking at the next 12 or 18 months to say, I'm going to be made up mostly of A and B type strategic account managers, and it's going to cost me this, or I need to do that to get there. The dashboard and the consistency of measurement and cadence is going to help sort of you better understand, do you have strategic account managers, or do you in some cases just have salespeople? By the way, strategic account managers could be coming from business units, not just sales. Getting a lot of questions. Another question came in was, our account managers also need to generate revenue like salespeople. Our thoughts on this? Well, that's an important question, because what we do know is on the dashboard, certainly the strategic account manager is primarily oriented to help serve, orchestrate their team to serve the customer and build the relationship long term. However, there's no mystery that the revenue expectation doesn't go away. So I do think that you need to consider that. One thing you probably, and I mentioned this in the compensation area, is your compensation driving the wrong behavior? If a strategic account manager is 60% base and 40% incentive like some salespeople, you're driving sales behavior. So is your compensation plan potentially driving the wrong behavior, as well as your high-value activity management? Do you really have the right high-value activities that's driving the right behavior? And then in addition to that, you may even have salespeople that are still local or by country in Europe or whatever, still on the team, and they may have more of a charter around getting the revenue, and the account manager is making sure all the resources and plans are in place for that to happen. Have one final question. It looks like, unless more come in, are there any effective compensation planning practices? Well, maybe just expanding on what I just said, it is normally, we're seeing that strategic account managers are normally more of the 70-30, 80-20 makeup from salary, commission, bonus. Commission could be a revenue component. Bonus is very critical because usually that's where a lot of organizations put the KPIs and say that as a strategic account manager, we expect you to have a strategic account plan for your account. We expect you to build senior level relationships. We expect your account to have a voice of the customer metric. So they may all fit in the KPI component of the bonus. So the bonus may have several components there, from maybe a development, a performance, and other factors. So I would say that make sure that you have the right balance, and also make sure that your compensation plan at least positions your strategic account managers to probably be fairly compensated, which means they usually end up in the upper 50% of the marketplace. Anytime we see compensation plans that drop their people in the lower 50% area, it's usually not supporting the gathering or utilization of getting A-level players. So there's some tips there. I really don't see any more questions coming in at the moment. I would like to just say how important it is this time of year to have an effective operating plan, and thank you very much for participating. And we look forward to having you again attend. Keep looking out in the email. We're always sending rich content around emails, our blogs, LinkedIn, varieties of places you can access valuable content that will enable you and your organization to have an absolutely fabulous 2014 in your Strategic Account Manager program. Thank you very much. Visit us at chapmanhq.com. The ebook on operational planning is there. Have a great day.